We're going to talk about grease. And what's that old guy used to be around here said, tires ain't pretty? Oh, what was his name?
Bear.
Bear. Well, grease ain't pretty, you know, but it's useful. First thing, I'll come around over there. You can see me. The first thing I wanted to talk about for just a moment, you guys seen this? Okay? I must tell you, it's an outstanding little unit, but I can't tell you that we'll be competitive in the retail market with this. It's got quality and value, but there's some other, unfortunately, cheap versions of these small grease guns in hardware stores and stuff for about half the price. So I'm telling you that so that you won't be disappointed if you try to take it to one of your retail stores and say, why don't you sell this product? Because I've been down that road and they look and say, looks like an outstanding product. Don't know that it'd sell too well hanging next to my other one, which is half the price. So be aware of that. Now, this one does have some quality in it with that grease tube that's in there is worth about $3.30. The flexible tube rather than a hard tube is probably worth another $3 or $4, which would mean the $28 retail price, if you looked at it, it would have $7 more value in this, let's say, than the cheaper version. But the cheaper versions are for running around 14 bucks. So a little hard to make that difference up, okay? So just be aware of that. Good product for us in the network, but probably not priced competitively for the retail market through stores.
What's the, you know, the wholesale prices?
Well, I'll give you the retail because I'm not supposed to do wholesale over the internet.
There you go.
The retail price on it's about $28. So, you know, dealers, you can check your price list on it. But for those that see it, this is a better quality grease gun. If you look at this and compare it to the other ones, it's a better quality. It's painted instead of the brushed silver look. It's a better gun, but whether or not people are willing to pay the extra price for what quality they can see, that will be the question. Now, calcium sulfonate grease. We've had lithium complex grease for as long as I've been the AMSOIL. That'd be 1991. We just went this year to calcium sulfonate. And you got to ask yourself, why would we make that change? What is that all based on? Okay, and I would say there's a couple things. One is, believe it or not, calcium sulfonate is a better product than lithium complex, but it has always been considered to be too expensive. Calcium sulfonate as a thickener was more expensive than could be marketed in the marketplace. But there's something happening on the other side to the lithium complex that's changed that formula. You guys are familiar with most of the new hybrid cars are all lining up with lithium batteries, right? You have any idea what that's doing to the cost of lithium? So now the idea that calcium sulfonate was too expensive compared to lithium is no longer true. Lithium is shooting off the market because of all the battery production that's going into lithium. So now what that means is grease was getting more expensive, period, with the lithium, but now it gets expensive enough that you can say, well, wait a minute. The calcium sulfonate, which is a better thickener, can now be bought equal to or less than the price of the lithium, so why not use it? You know, it's kind of like I can't get the other stuff less expensive anymore, so why not just make an upgrade at the same time to the better grease? Now, I brought you a some of these. I think I got enough of them. Michael, if you take one and pass it around. This is a pretty good primer on calcium sulfonate that I got from a publication on the internet. And I also put a compatibility chart on the back, because that's one of the questions that will immediately come up. Is calcium sulfonate compatible with everything that the lithium complex grease was compatible with? Because we worry about that in grease. You guys know what happens to grease when it's not compatible? When you put grease together, it's not compatible. It usually liquefies and reacts with each other chemically. So what will happen is that instead of having a nice thick grease, which is, you know what I'm talking about, it's kind of like thick jello, it'll become runny like a thick oil and run out of the cavity wherever it is, and there won't be any grease left. Okay, so when you really get incompatible greases, they do not chemically mix with each other, and they usually react in a way to destroy the grease. So it's a bad deal to do that, because probably the first time you really know it is when whatever the component is locks up from no lubrication, you know, like a ball joint or bearing, and it just locks up. So this calcium sulfonate, if you look at what this report is talking about here, yes, we thunder bumpers in Florida. Anyway, they got a picture showing you the really nice, you know, look of the thickener on there, and I want to make sure we're clear on what's in grease. Grease has an oil in it, just like any other lubricating oil. That oil is what we want to actually lubricate the components. Make sense? But since we want something thick to maintain the oil close to what we're trying to lubricate, and most of the times one of the reasons you use grease is it's not in a location where a liquid would stay. You try to put a liquid on a ball joint or on a tie rod end, it just drains off, right? But if I put grease on there and it will stay in the joint, then it sticks around and wicks the oil out to lubricate the moving part. That's what grease is all about. It's designed to keep in contact and wick the oil out to lubricate. Now, one of the things that calcium sulfonate adds to that formula is it gives you an actual increase in your extreme pressure loading, because the crystals of calcium sulfonate will actually act as an extreme pressure lubricant as well as a thickener. So what happens is when you get increased heavy load pushing down on this grease in an area, and the oil is trying to do its best, guess what starts to interact and help with the load? The crystals of calcium sulfonate. So it makes it a more than just a thickener. It participates in the extreme loading capability of the grease. Most of the time thickeners do nothing, they just hold oil there. But this calcium sulfonate actually participates in the heavy loads. And if you look on the piece of paper that I gave you, you'll see a chart that talks about testing done and the relative comparison between lithium and calcium sulfonate, okay? And if you look on that chart, one of the most impressive things to look at is what's called the Timken OK load and the 4-ball EP welding. Now what that means in that 4-ball test, if some of you remember, in a 4-ball test you put 3 ball bearings, balls, into a cup. You put one on top, the cup rotates, and hydraulic pressure is pushed down so that the 3 balls on the bottom plus the one on the top have to literally hold this weight, right? And then you rotate everything, making the balls turn. Well, in oil, the cup's got a bath of oil. With grease, you grease them up, and they've got grease on them, and then they go through the same test. Well, the weld test says how much pressure do I have to put on this thing before the ball bearings weld to each other under extreme pressure. It's called a weld test, and it's a very important test for extremely high loaded conditions. And look at this. The welding point for lithium complex was 315 kilograms of pressure. And the calcium sulfonate is 400 for a number 1 grease and 500 for a number 2. Now in the past, we didn't look at number 1 and number 2s having much difference when it came to lithium. That's why you see lithium, they only have one number. Because number 1 or number 2 of lithium is going to be the same. The thickener doesn't participate in the extreme pressure condition. But the calcium sulfonate, the number 2, which is thicker, meaning it's got more calcium sulfonate in it, actually participates in that pressure test, and it takes 500 kilograms before you go to the well point on that grease. Very impressive. You go down to the what's called the Temkin OK load. We won't get into the exact methodology that test is run, but you look at it, it's again 70 and 60 pounds versus 35 pounds for lithium. Now, what it means is making this grease an extremely tough grease, very tough. In fact, tough enough that in the past it was a little bit too expensive for multi-purpose use. You didn't have a reason to go to that level, but since lithium costs so much, you might as well go to that level and use the calcium sulfonate. And then if you look at the, the dropping point, it's not that much difference, 316 versus 312. Lithium was always pretty good at that. One thing that calcium sulfonate doesn't do as well as lithium is the water spray-off test, which is a water-resistant quality. And I haven't had a chance to investigate yet. I'll find out and tell you the next meeting we have whether the water-resistant grease has all gone to calcium sulfonate or there remain lithium complex, because you're going to have to do something to adjust this calcium sulfonate to keep it from washing out. They spray water to determine how easily it'll wash out and how much it'll stay in. And that's one weakness it has compared to lithium. It doesn't have the water washout capability of lithium. So if you're looking, the old days we used to say a lot of times our regular multi-purpose grease was really a good water-resistant grease. We'd have to say on this that if you really have a water-resistant situation, you need to move on to the marine-grade grease. This grease might wash out a little bit quicker than the old lithium. Talking about some of the advantages and the disadvantages, and it says that what we just talked about, and looking for the disadvantages here, concerns, calcium sulfonate, it says, another downside is the performance directive pumpability and water spray-off. Pumpability is a concern that can be alleviated through proper base oil selection. A thin layer of grease is placed on a panel and sprayed with water. After the test is completed, the percent of grease lost is calculated. Many calcium sulfonate greases typically show significant spray-off, so not quite as good as the lithium. And let's see. It says calcium sulfonate greases are generally beneficial, good against rust prevention, and good against oxidation and oxidation stability. They're good. So it's a good grease. I guess the bottom line we want to know is that we spent a lot of years with lithium complex. This grease in general is a better grease, a little bit higher temperature grease, and it's affordable with the current cost of lithium to use this grease. Now in the compatibility chart that I gave you, if you look at that, you're going to see that calcium sulfonate is relatively close in the number of things it's compatible with lithium. They're both fairly compatible. Nothing is compatible with polyurea, and you should remember that, because once in a while you get a question about somebody who says they're using polyurea grease, and you should wish them well and tell them they should continue using polyurea grease unless they're willing to clean the joint out and put something different in, because polyurea is not, well, let's see down here, it is compatible with a calcium complex, and that's about it. And polyurea is shear stable, well, it's still polyurea. So if you look at the calcium sulfonate, it's not compatible with calcium complex. Now that would make sense, because I have calcium sulfonate, which is a chemical. If we go mixing it with calcium, it's going to interfere with the calcium sulfonate chemically, so we can't do that. And then the calcium sulfonate is also incompatible with clay-based grease and polyurea. Well, lithium complex was also incompatible with clay-based grease, incompatible with barium, and incompatible with polyurea. So in general, this grease is going to be compatible with lithium complex greases and the stuff that we see a lot in the market. But just be aware that the grease you don't have anything to do with is polyurea-based grease. You get around that, they've got problems. And I'll tell you, I was doing a big marine show, and they had all these trailers, and these guys I was talking about trailers trying to get, and this guy said, man, they told us to use this, and it was polyurea. And I said, well, that is a pretty good grease, but where's your label? He said, what are you talking about? I said, well, you should have a label on the hub, because if you're putting polyurea in here, and 99% of the people are going to put something different in when they grease it, and you don't label the hub saying filled with polyurea grease, these guys are going to be wiping out hubs running to the coast or wherever they're going, because they're going to put some regular grease in there. It's going to turn it all to gel or to liquid and drain out, and you're going to wipe out the hubs. He says, nah, those guys told us it was good. Live long and prosper. So, grease. Anybody got a question about grease? Yes, sir.
Is there any applications that the lithium failed that now we can go after with this better grease that you're aware of?
The question is if there's any applications that calcium sulfonate allows us to address that we couldn't do with lithium. Now, what I would say on that is two things. One, we got to look at temperature applications, because this grease is a higher temperature rated grease than the lithium. So not a lot, but just enough so that we probably could see a couple of conditions where it would qualify for the temperature conditions we're in, where lithium before was in trouble. Now, we did have high temperature grease applications before. In the industrial side, actually the old racing grease is a higher temperature grease. But the standard multi-purpose, this grease would go to a higher temperature. And I believe that we used to use the term for multi-purpose grease of somewhere around 10,000 pounds load. In other words, if you had a vehicle that went over 10,000 pounds, you should move to heavy duty grease. I would imagine this calcium sulfonate might change that formula. And that's something I have to ask AMSOIL, is where do they draw the line now between this grease and truly heavy duty grease? Because remember, our heavy duty grease is only the polymeric truck and chassis grease, heavy duty. So where does this grease actually, what's its upper load limit? And it doesn't really say. So that's something I've got to find out from the company, because it's got a much higher, obviously much higher weld, 4-ball weld test. It's got a higher Temkin load. It's at as high a numbers as our old heavy duty grease. So this may be a multi-purpose heavy duty grease. In other words, it can go to a much higher level.
Will they be using this in the off-road grease also?
Oh yeah, you can use it anywhere. But the thing is, again, the polymeric grease has that special quality of being so tacky and sticky that it won't, that it stays in place real well. So there's some off-road applications for that. But this grease has a much broader application, because it's like a hybrid multi-purpose heavy-duty grease because of its load characteristics. So it's going to be a wider range of heavier loads. You could use this in truck and chassis loads that were too heavy for the old multi-purpose. If you didn't want to go to the polymeric, truck grease, truck and chassis, this would be a heavy-duty grease. So, good stuff. You never know when the conditions are going to move you, but like I said, not only to move to a better grease, but the fact of the real world and lithium reaching such prices because of its competition for batteries, that time to move on to something else.